Welcome to Wireless LAN Weekly, a podcast focused on the wireless networking professional. We aim to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire. Get ready to listen and enjoy. Now to our host of the show, Keith Parsons.
Hello, this is Keith Parsons with Wireless LAN Weekly, episode number 8. In this episode, we'll be targeting both the technical and the soft skills side. On the technical side, we have Ben Miller, and Ben will be bringing us information about wireless sniffing. Ben has a blog specifically dedicated to wireless sniffing and teaches wireless LANs on a pretty continual basis, so we'll be glad to have Ben with us for that. And the second half is on email etiquette. Elaine Rogers out of Ireland will be talking to us on email etiquette. So now let's get on with the show and enjoy episode number 8.
Today's wireless networking definition from the CWNP Dictionary of Wireless Terms and Acronyms.
This is Joel Barrett, and today's term is decibel. A decibel is a numerical unit designed to avoid the direct use of exponential numbers. 0 decibels is 10 to the power of 0 tenths, or just 1. 3 decibels is 10 to the power of 3 tenths, or about 2. 10 decibels is 10 to the power of 10 tenths, or 10. Decibel is a convenient unit for expressing exponential power gain and loss of an RF signal. So there are 2 typical ways that gain and loss are described. dBi, which is a decibel gain or loss reference to an isotropic antenna. It's commonly used to measure antenna gain, and the greater the dBi value, the higher the gain, and the more acute the angle of coverage. dBm is decibels referenced to 1 milliwatt. This is an absolute measurement of power where 0 decibels is equal to 1 milliwatt. So this is Joel Barrett for the CWNP Dictionary, and tune in again for the CWNP Dictionary Term of the Day.
Rant, pet peeve, what really bugs you? 60 seconds of complaining starts now.
Hey, this is Derek Sisterhen. You know what I can't stand? When people don't use their turn signal. I'm thinking to myself, I should just go up to your car and just pull the turn signal light bulbs out, because if you're not going to use them, no sense in having them there. I'd like to know it if you're going to change lanes on me. I can't stand it when you don't use a turn signal.
Things every wireless LAN professional needs to know. Gear up, buckle down, and stand by for the real techie stuff.
Welcome back. This is Keith Parsons, and today I'm with Ben Miller. Ben Miller is the author of the Sniff Wi-Fi blog. He's also the course director of Global Knowledge, and specifically over the wireless curriculum. Today he's going to be talking to us about why we should be using a wireless sniffer. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing real good, Keith. How are you?
Great. Are you ready to share with us your knowledge on sniffing wireless?
More than ready.
More than ready. All right. Turn the time over. It's your time now.
Yeah, the reason why I wanted to talk to Keith about this is, just to give you guys a little background, the work that I do is I do this blog, as he mentioned, Sniff Wi-Fi, but where that came out of was doing work, training having to do with Wi-Fi, and also doing a little bit of consulting with Wi-Fi. And I just find that the Wi-Fi sniffer, the tools that are able to capture Wi-Fi frames, also this would probably also include Wi-Fi spectrum analyzers as well. These tools are some of the most valuable but underused tools by folks who work in networking, and sometimes even by folks who work specifically in wireless. I find a lot of times people who specialize in wireless even kind of overlook these tools sometimes. So I just wanted to talk to Keith about what can make these tools so valuable. And Keith, of course, is an expert on these as well. He does a lot of work, especially with one of the better sniffing tools out there, the Air Magnet Wi-Fi Analyzer. First of all, just to give a little bit of a background on what these tools are and what they are not. What these tools are wireless frame capture tools. They are tools that basically listen to, they sniff, if you will, a single wireless channel, and they give back to the user information about all 802.11 frame transmissions going across that one channel. Okay. An analogy that is sometimes used to wired networks is it's somewhat similar to using a wired sniffer where your adapter is running in promiscuous mode. The idea is when you're in promiscuous mode, not only do you see the frames that are sent and received from your wired station, but you also see anything else that's on that physical segment. Now, promiscuous mode in wired networking tends not to be as effective nowadays as it was, say, 10 or so years ago, because nobody uses hubs anymore. You have differentiation of physical segments. You have different collision domains. And so therefore, people don't really use hubs anymore. And when you run promiscuous mode, since you just are the lone device on your physical segment, you don't tend to see a lot of information beyond your physical segment. With wireless networking, however, sniffing can still be fairly valuable, even in kind of operating it in kind of a general area, because wireless access points operate in a collision domain that's much more similar to a wired hub than a wired switch. In a wired switch, each host device, each endpoint device has its own, physical channel, essentially. In wireless, when you have a number of devices on a wireless access point, they're all sharing one channel. So therefore, when you operate a sniffer, you're able to see all frame transmissions that are sent and received on the channel. So that's what a wireless sniffing tool is. It's a device that can kind of see everything being sent and received on the channel. What a wireless sniffing tool is not is a stumbling tool, or a discovery tool, as they're sometimes called. If people listening to this podcast are familiar with tools like NetStumbler or iStumbler for OS, Air Radar is another one for OS X. If you have an iPhone or an iPod Touch, there's tools like Wi-Fi Fo Fum. These tools are all what we call stumbling or discovery tools. These tools just show you a list of access points that are in your area. They are not capturing Wi-Fi frame transmissions. They're not capturing everything that's going across a channel. They're just indicating that there's an access point on the channel. Okay. Now, as far as the kind of technical differences in how these tools operate, what the Wi-Fi sniffing tool does that's unique is it allows a Wi-Fi adapter to be used in what we call monitor mode. There's 4 modes for any Wi-Fi adapter. This is a station or an access point or whatever. Any kind of Wi-Fi radio has 4 modes it can operate in. Those modes are master mode, which basically means it's an access point. Managed mode, which basically means it's a station. Ad hoc mode, which means that it's a station operating without an access point, just doing station-to-station connectivity. And then the 4th mode, as I mentioned before, is monitor mode. So that's kind of the fundamental thing that makes a Wi-Fi sniffer do its sniffing. Now, what's so valuable about using a device that's doing monitor mode is you can see sort of the actions rather than the words of a Wi-Fi device. Whether it be a Wi-Fi access point or Wi-Fi station. I always like to kind of remind people of the old saying that actions speak louder than words. The words in this case would be what the interface, what the GUI interface is telling you. So on my Wi-Fi client, it's telling me that I'm connected to the SSID of Radius, which is the SSID I use here at home. And it's telling me that I have a certain signal strength, and it's telling me that I'm on a certain channel. And if I'm attempting to connect to a new network, it'll tell me whether I'm scanning or whether I'm attempting to connect or whether I have limited connectivity. This feedback that you get in the client software interface or in your access point or in your controller's interface, that's sort of the words that are telling you what the device is doing. The actions are the frames that are being transmitted. So sometimes the words may not tell me the whole story when I have a problem with my Wi-Fi. For example, if I'm attempting to connect to a network that's using WPA2 Enterprise, I can get a variety of messages. No connection available, limited connectivity, connected locally but no internet access, things like that. That may not be specific enough for me to be able to solve the problem of why can't I get on the internet, or why can't I access the resource I need to access. And so it can be very, very valuable to use a Wi-Fi sniffer to run monitor mode and to capture all the frames that my laptop is sending and receiving, to see the actions behind what it's telling me. When it's telling me limited or no connectivity, if I capture the frames, I can see, is my device successfully doing a wireless association, or is that unsuccessful? If it's a successful wireless association, then is it reaching the server when it does an 802.1x EAP authentication for WPA or WPA2, or is it not reaching the server? Is it receiving a certificate successfully? If it's doing a type of 802.1x EAP that requires certificates to build a encrypted tunnel, or is it not receiving the certificate successfully? Is the server rejecting my username and password, or is it accepting the username and password? And then, if all of those things are happening correctly, you can go beyond that to even, some wired information. You can see, is it successfully sending and receiving frames that might be of the correct size to do things like setting up ARP and setting up DHCP. So the bottom line there is that by looking at these frames that are sent and received when you're running a wireless sniffer, you kind of get a look at the intrinsic actions that a device is doing. Okay. Now there's other value in using a sniffer as well. I mean, it's kind of all an offshoot of that fact that you're seeing actions rather than words, as I like to say. For example, if you're having a problem with devices that are already connected, you can use your sniffer to see if there's high numbers of errors. If you think the network is running a little bit slow, you can use the sniffer to see which stations are sending and receiving data that's a little bit slow. That's using lower data rates. But the bottom line is the wireless sniffer kind of gives you that view into what the nature of your access points and stations are, what they are actually doing on the network, rather than just relying on the software interface to sort of tell you what the stations are. Again, getting the actions rather than the words. So Keith, that's what I would say is probably the biggest benefit of running a sniffer, that ability to get inside and see what the actions of the devices are. So what are some of the things that kind of you use with Air Magnet when you're running a sniffer?
Well, I agree with you. What sniffers allow you to do, and again, this is lowercase sniffer. There is a company that sells a product called Sniffer with the uppercase sniffer. We're just talking about the sniffing and generally looking at packets. I like to see the way you put it as actions. You can see how the communications are actually happening, not just the result of those communications. The example you gave about just having the association, you can watch the full association when it gets through. I try to think of association as like getting a link light. On a wired network, if you have a link light, that means it's more than likely not the physical layer, the MAC layer. You have to look up the stack to troubleshoot. On a wireless LAN, seeing the association come through successfully means it's not a wireless issue. It's up the stack. And so it could be that, the example you gave about the radio server. So I like to see the packets themselves. One of the questions I get, and that's kind of why we got you here today, is what's the, how do you go about reading all of those frames as they come, zipping by, and decode those into something that has meaning?
Yeah, well, there's a few different ways that you read things. It just kind of depends on what specific task you're trying to accomplish. Let's start with the example of trying to get to a radio server, or trying to analyze a device trying to connect to a radio server. That's one of those tasks that requires a little bit of knowledge about how 802.11 networking works. You have to have some degree of knowledge about what the association is supposed to look like, what the 802.1x EAP session with the radius server is supposed to look like, to be able to troubleshoot those things. What I find, obviously this will probably sound self-serving, but taking a class on that type of thing can always help. Outside of that, I find that a lot of times you can get really good information by reading books on it. I actually find that the certification study guides, the CWNA study guides, do a good job of kind of breaking down what types of frames you should be seeing when a device associates. And then in addition, just taking some time and doing some hands-on work with it on your own. If you run a tool like, the one that you usually run, the Air Magnet Wi-Fi Analyzer, if you go in and just find your Wi-Fi device and run the diagnostic tool, all you have to do is just disconnect your device and reconnect it, and the little diagnostic tool will show you everything that is being sent while you make that successful connection. If you take a close look at the successful connections, that'll kind of help you out when something isn't successful. You can hopefully kind of see what was missing there. And again, for other tasks, you might need to know different other things. For example, to the speed problem that I was talking about earlier on, knowing kind of which data rates are available for stations to use. If you have an 802.11a or G or N station, knowing which data rates they could use and comparing that with which data rates they are using to try to see if a station is sending at an abnormally low data rate and therefore causing the channel to get slow. That type of thing can help. And when the third thing I was talking about, the potential problems with errors, just having an idea of kind of what normal percentages of errors you might see on your network are, and if you see percentages that vary from that, those are all things you can do to kind of prepare yourself to do effective Wi-Fi analysis or sniffing or whatever you want to call it.
I've got a story that goes along with that. I was at a consulting site, and we had a bunch of us working together, and we had walkie-talkies, and I'd sent them out with Air Magnet Analyzer and called on the walkie-talkie and asked one of the other guys, what's your error rate, your retry rate at this location? And he calls back on the walkie-talkie and says 82. And I went, oh, sorry. No, I didn't mean what's the count of number of frames. I meant what's your percent of retries? 82%, Keith. Yeah, so having a baseline up front to know what's normal. I've been in environments where 6% retry was normal, and others where 18% was normal.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that depends on the type of device you're using. Maybe it's just the specific brand of phones that I've used, but for whatever reason, when I'm using voice over Wi-Fi phones, especially when people start walking, the retry rates sometimes just get staggering. I've seen environments where it seems like no matter what we do, with certain types of phones, we're up in the high 20s or 30s for retry percentages. And that's another thing that we should talk about, since you brought up the term retry, and I'm using it as well. The retry is something that's different from a CRC or cyclic redundancy check error. Typically you want to use the retry percentage when looking for errors in a sniffer, not so much the CRC error percentage. Would you agree with that, Keith?
Yeah, because they actually mean two different things, and one of them is very precise. The retry error, the first packet that goes out in its header, it says, "I'm not a retry. I'm the first guy," and all answering ones that don't get an acknowledgement, their second, third, and fourth, whatever, send a little bit that's set to "I'm a retry," and so we can actually count those and find out exactly what's going on. CRCs, on the other hand, you were mentioning a little earlier on a little bit we talked about CRC errors are dependent about where your sniffer is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the the way I always put it, like if I'm teaching a class or something like that, is that retries are telling you something about the network, and CRC errors are telling you something about the location of the sniffer. So a retry percentage, if it's high, that means there's high numbers of retries on the network, because, as you said, the retry is indicated in the header. It's indicated in something that's being sent by a networked device. The CRC error percentage is something that's calculated at the sniffer. It's calculated at the device that's running in monitor mode. And so therefore that may have no relation to what's going on the network. The network may be successfully receiving frames, and your device that's doing the sniffing may be for whatever reason getting errors. Maybe it's in a place with high interference. Maybe you place the sniffer far away from the device you're trying to analyze. Who knows? But the bottom line is, like I said, I just like to say retries are a network thing. CRC errors are more about the location of the sniffing device. That's kind of how I look at that.
Well, thanks. I agree with you on that. Another item we could talk about here, you'd mentioned in a blog article just lately about some of the different sniffers that are available and how your attitudes toward those. You want to share with us the different ones that are available and the ones you like to use?
Yeah, I will share that. I mean, the thing about this is when I this is probably going to be a longer story than I should tell, but whatever. Hopefully you have time on the podcast.
No problem. Go for it.
The reason why I started the blog was I was inspired by JohnAugust.com. John August is a screenwriter. I don't know. He has a lot of credits, mostly in the action and fantasy genres. For example, he wrote Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the most recent one. In any case, though, John August created this free blog just helping out people who are aspiring to be free screenwriters. It's completely free, and it's just, his slogan on the blog is just a ton of useful information about screenwriting. And so I was reading it, and I was trying to think of something that I could sort of pay it forward with, and I thought, I know a little bit about Wi-Fi capture and analysis, or Wi-Fi sniffing, and the URL of Sniff Wi-Fi was available, which was the shortest and sort of catchiest one I could find that was still available. And so that's why I started up the Sniff Wi-Fi blog, was to just sort of pay it forward. But the reason why I brought this up is because as I've been doing the blog, there's been a few different vendors that have contacted me and said, hey, we can give you free stuff, essentially, just write up something about it on the blog. Not necessarily saying it has to be positive or negative, but write up something. And I always just feel like when I go through this stuff about like which is the best or the worst or which is my favorite, what the most fundamental thing I'm doing right now is costing myself a chance to get a bunch of free junk in the future, because I'm sure I'm going to, go through a few people that might have otherwise given me free stuff and talk about how their product just isn't as good. But in any case, in the interest of, giving folks that are listening to the podcast the best information possible, I really think there's only two real options for sort of professional grade wireless LAN analysis, and that is Air Magnet Wi-Fi Analyzer and Wild Packet's OmniPeak. There's other things out there that are sort of contenders, but those two are really the best. With Air Magnet Wi-Fi Analyzer, I find that is the best for, I guess, what you'd call sort of quick, basic troubleshooting. It certainly is the best if you have, people that are going to be out in the field, because Air Magnet Wi-Fi Analyzer absolutely blows away every other product in ease of use and navigation. It just allows you to do everything so easily. One of the things that for most Wi-Fi analyzers is kind of the most frustrating or the most time-consuming thing is creating all the little filters you need to create to be able to isolate which station is doing what or which access point is doing what on the network. And with Air Magnet, everything's pre-created for you. You click on a station, it filters on the station. You click on the channel, it changes to the right channel that you want to analyze. It's just so quick and easy to do. The only reason that there's even another contender out there to Air Magnet is because that air magnet just lacks versatility in a couple of key ways. For example, with air magnet, I mentioned before, I love the fact that you can filter on a specific station just by clicking on it. And just by clicking on that station, I can find out what the retry percentage is, how many retransmitted or how many frames are airing out as a percentage. And the problem, though, is it only shows it to me in frames, not in bytes. And so that's not as, specific as I'd like to get it, because, if I have a bunch of small frames that are all airing out, that's going to have a different effect on the channel than if I have huge frames that are airing out. And that's where I kind of like WildPacket's OmniPeak as a second option. With WildPacket's OmniPeak, you're going to spend more time setting it up. It's just not as quick and easy. The navigation isn't quite as intuitive as with Air Magnet Wi-Fi Analyzer, but it just has amazing versatility. It has an amazing ability to do complex filters on things like, I want to filter on this device, and I want to filter on this type of frame for this device, or this type of frame, but only if it's a retry for this device, or this type of frame only if it's coming from this device or to this device or whatever. It just has tons of different filtering capability, tons of different statistics that you can see. Just going back to the retry example, I can see the frames or the bytes for retries for any device when I'm capturing. And so, the way I always tell it to people is Air Magnet. It's probably the best starting point. That's the best one if you're relatively new to Wi-Fi sniffing. WildPacket's OmniPeak is my personal favorite one to use, and the one that, at least among folks that I know that are a little bit more hardcore about sniffing, that they tend to use a little bit more often. Just because it has that extra versatility. The other one, other ones that I should mention is I find that ComView for Wi-Fi has a superb packet generator. So if you need to inject packets onto the Wi-Fi channel to do any kind of testing or anything like that, I find the ComView for Wi-Fi packet generator is great. And then I know there's a lot of folks out there that are kind of devotees to Wireshark. Wireshark is the free, the open source wired sniffer. It can also be used to show wireless frames as well. And so if you really like Wireshark, the thing I always like to mention is there's a USB adapter called the Air PCAP adapter that can allow you to do wireless capture directly into the Windows version of Wireshark. So ComView for Wi-Fi and Wireshark are the other two I would mention there.
Great. It's a nice overview of what's available in the wireless world. Well, we talked about the different modes, from master mode, managed mode, ad hoc, and monitor mode in Wi-Fi adapters, and then on to how we take that monitor mode in sniffing. And you talked about some of your favorites and the ones that are available. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us before we end this section?
I guess the only other thing that I always like to mention is that even though I sometimes kind of consider myself an evangelist for Wi-Fi analysis or Wi-Fi sniffing, don't forget that it only is one part of the whole sort of troubleshooting and design equation. I really believe that the sniffers are underused, and a lot of people would benefit from using them more often and learn to use them. But just don't forget that there's also oftentimes a lot of valuable information in your client utility. A lot of times in wireless controllers nowadays, they do a great job showing you information about the network that can be useful for troubleshooting and analysis as well. And so I just always like to say, that the sniffer is very, very useful, but it should definitely be sort of just a part of what you're doing for the troubleshooting and analysis and design of your wireless LAN.
Well, thank you, Ben. How can our listeners find you on the net? It's sniffwifi.com.
Yeah, sniffwifi.com, like I said, is just a blog I do. I try to update it once a week, but I have not been doing a great job of that recently. If there's topics in Wi-Fi sniffing or anything else having to do with Wi-Fi that you're interested in, I try to be as responsive as possible. I'm kind of backlogged a little bit. I have a few kind of posts that I've still been intending to do. But that's probably the best way to contact me. If you want to contact me directly via email, it's just ben@sniffwifi.com. But that's probably the best way to get in touch with me.
Well, thank you very much. Yet on the social networks as well, on Twitter, or
I have squatted my Twitter, slash sniff Wi-Fi thing, but I haven't actually started posting anything on Twitter, and so I don't have much on that either. I mean, I do have a Twitter page, but one of my sort of moonlighting job is I'm a journalist for professional wrestling and ultimate fighting, like mixed martial arts, and so I have a Twitter page that focuses on that. But I don't have anything that focuses on Wi-Fi at this point, so I want to get that started.
Well, you might need to, because I was just noticing on Twitter a couple of people have been asking me how to contact you via Twitter. So just a little hint there. You might have an audience waiting for you.
Inspired by this podcast, I'll make my first post after I get off the line with you, Keith.
Well, sounds great. I appreciate your time today, and we'll have these URLs in the show notes as well. And thanks for talking with us today.
Yeah, and thanks for having me on. Appreciate it, Keith.
Elevator speech. Our guests have just 2 minutes to tell us all about their product or service offering. Ready, set, go.
Hi, my name is Elaine Rogers. My company is called Sniffing Coaching. And we already heard in episode 3 of the podcast where the name Sniffing comes from. I'm a personal and business coach, and I work with people who want to improve aspects of their lives, such as relationships, life-work balance, weight loss, finance, etc., etc. As a business coach, I help people heighten their self-awareness so that they can equip themselves with the relevant tools to increase confidence, improve their managerial and interpersonal skills, improve productivity, and lower stress levels. That's always a good one. I would offer free intake sessions normally, and then I work closely with the client to design their own program for further development, working on their potential beyond their comfort zone. I'm a great believer in pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone. As a coach, I assure 100% commitment to assisting people when they're prioritizing their goals and really making time for the important things in their lives. I'm also a corporate business coach and trainer of IT management and business skills. We covered communication skills in episode 3, so please feel free to check back there and have a listen if you haven't done so already. That was all about engaging with the customer. And we talked about the first thing that was involved there in communication was listening. So if you'd like to find out more about me or more about coaching in general, please visit www.sniffingcoaching.com.
Hey, being a professional means more than just knowing the technical. Now it's time to soften up and talk about the non-techie side for a minute. Slow down, put your feet up, and listen up to these items to help you on the professional side. Enjoy.
Hello again, this is Keith Parsons. In today's soft skills section, we have again as a guest Elaine Rogers, business coach and trainer with Sniffing Coaching. Elaine is going to be speaking with us today about email etiquette, one of those things we all do on a daily basis, sending and receiving email, and hopefully we'll learn some good tips and techniques on how to do the email bit a little better. Elaine, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thanks, Keith. How are you?
Great.
Good.
I learned from you today the correct pronunciation of where you live. It's not Cork, the way Americans say it. You say it more like Quark.
Or I could say it with a Cork accent and say Quark.
There you go.
There you go.
Well, what do you have for us today about email?
Well, thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me back on the show. Today I'd like to talk about email etiquette, just as you introduced. And as you said as well, we use email to communicate with everybody, our boss, our colleagues, our clients, prospective employers, family, friends. At times, sometimes the only communication we have with certain people is through email, for whatever reason. It's a little bit similar to texting as well. You get into a texting role or a texting mode with certain people over a certain period of time. So the first thing I'm going to look at is what is email etiquette? Etiquette itself is a very loose term, and it refers to the customary code of polite behavior in society or among members of a particular profession or group. And like every other form of communication, one must use proper etiquette when dealing with other human beings, because we're all subjective. There are, of course, rules of etiquette which pertain to email, and I'm going to discuss a few of them here later in the podcast. Firstly, why do we need email etiquette? Well, firstly, for professionalism. By using proper email language, your company will convey a professional image. Secondly, for efficiency. Emails that get to the point are much more effective than poorly worded emails. And the third one, protection from liability, or at least lower costs in liability. Employee awareness of email risks can protect your company from costly lawsuits. So I'm just going to talk about, or at least list some of the general email etiquette laws or rules. You may agree or disagree with some of them, so we'll see how we go. First of all is the use of all uppercase letters. Now, we all know that uppercase means shouting. So if you write a whole email in uppercase, just because you've had the caps lock turned on, and don't bother turning it off, it is going to seem like that you're shouting, and you're putting across a message of aggression then, which can be deemed as being rude. Now, we can use uppercase to emphasize maybe a particular word. We can also use italics and emboldening a word to emphasize. Another thing we can do is put a word into an asterisk on either side. That's also used to demonstrate that we're actually doing something as well. Treat an email as privately as you would a postcard. So when you're writing your email, you know then that everybody or anybody can possibly see that email. It can't be erased as easily as burning a snail mail letter if it was to be intercepted. So just be careful when you're writing that just because you're sitting in your cubicle and nobody else is looking over your shoulder in the moment, that doesn't mean that no one else is going to read that email. Always check spelling and punctuation. Sounds obvious, but sometimes it can be, again, seemed as being rude or just laziness, or you're not bothered whether your words are spelled correctly or not. Texting type words, personally, I would say it's okay for emailing friends or maybe colleagues that you're emailing with continuously throughout the day, and they're just over in the other side of the room or in another room in the building. But it really is more work to actually read those words. We're not all familiar with all of them. And also the use of acronyms for saying, a 10-worded sentence. They get a bit silly after a while. So the texting type words, the acronyms, shortened words, they're fine when it's a very, very casual email, but definitely not in a professional capacity. Never send spam. It is unsolicited email and it is never welcome. I get advertisements sometimes from people that I give my business cards to at a network meeting, or they'll automatically include me in their mailing list. Now, I didn't give consent to be added to a mailing list. So will this become the rule of thumb? I don't know. We'll have to see how things go with that. It's a case of, well, I have your business card now, so I can sign you up for anything I want to. I don't think so. Emoticons, very popular. They're being used now in Skype, on Facebook, on Twitter. We all know the little smiley face. We're all familiar with the wink and the laughing. And they have become a general accepted form of showing emotion or feeling in a non-emotive world that is written emails. But the only thing I'd say there is keep it to an acceptable level, and not have pumping love hearts the whole way across your message or waving hands, and you've all this movement in your email when you're trying to get across a very serious point. And a little sidestep of that is to not fill up your email with loads of question marks or loads of exclamation marks. certainly the exclamation marks tend to show aggression again. So it's just to leave them out or just put in a couple, not to overuse them. Has somebody upset you? Have they sent you an email and they've hit a nerve? Okay, count to 10 slowly. Count to 100 if you've anger management challenges. Anyway, don't respond immediately. That would be my advice. And preferably get a meal between the email and you, or a good night's sleep. Sleep on it before you either lose a customer or you could really upset your boss by emailing back as a reaction. Keep your message short and to the point. Try and cut out waffle. Waffle, I'm not sure if it's a term that we'd be familiar with in the US, but it basically means when you just keep on sort of talking and you've kind of gone off the point and you're sort of gone off in a tangent. And by the time you sort of made that point from earlier, people have gone off to make a cup of tea, or they've fallen asleep, or they just don't remember what your original point was. So cut out the waffle. What was I talking about? Oh yeah, email etiquette. Create an out-of-office reply. You're responding that you cannot deal with their email immediately, but you will on your return. So you're basically giving reassurance. But just please make sure that if you do that, then when you do come back to the office, ensure that you do deal with their email on your return. And use the out-of-office reply appropriately. Okay, we don't need to use it to tell everybody that we're going out to get our hair done. Subject line. This is another sort of pet peeve of mine. Keep your subject line pertinent to the body of the email and keep it blunt. 2-3 words, that's the maximum that you need to make your message blatant in terms of when somebody's getting a bunch of emails into their inbox and they want to sort by the sender. And when the subjects are properly used, they'll get grouped by subject and they'll get grouped by sender. If you sort by subject, they'll get grouped by subject. So if you're using a subject line, an old subject line, to talk about something different, you're just making things harder for that person when they're sorting out their emails or sorting their inbox or a particular folder. So if you're using an old email to reply back to somebody, but you're talking about something different, change the subject line. Just put that little extra bit of time in to type in a different subject line. Also, on that point, don't start talking about what the subject line says and then go on to a completely different topic. I would certainly rather send out 2 separate emails with 2 different subject lines, and it just makes it easier then to sort through the emails on the other side. And if you do that as a sign of respect for others, they'll respond back as well. Don't get involved with chain emails. Okay, they're a form of spamming and they waste time. Use the reply all button appropriately. There's nothing worse than being in a list of 20 people and everyone is replying to all and you're getting 20 messages back 40 times just to arrange to go for a coffee tomorrow night. So really, there's no point in getting all that stuff involved. Have one person as the keeper and everybody can reply back to them. And also just be very careful if you're included in an email and you're only a CC person, you've only been copied, then it may not be appropriate to reply back to everybody, but just to reply back to the sender. Also be very careful of overusing, depending on what email program that you're using. Be careful of overusing the high priority or the important flagging systems. If every message you send out, you send as high priority or as important, you're basically crying wolf, because nobody's going to take it seriously, in the sense that no one's going to think, oh, this message must be really important because every message from Elaine is really important. Well, then they're not really that important. Be careful with formatting. If you're using a HTML editor, or maybe Microsoft Word is your editor, it's possible the person you're sending the message to is not able to read that message in any of the editors, and plain text will come through, and they will lose the formatting, and it may interfere with the content of the email. One that comes to mind actually is the $sign, or in our case, the euro sign. It can show up as all different kinds of symbols in an email. That's another point, actually, maybe to spell out or use the US acronym, or in our case, we'd say EUR for euro, or EURO instead of the actual symbol. Just another couple of points with relation to business emailing. Again, be concise and to the point, because you don't want to be wasting someone's time. And this is very appropriate or very important when you are emailing prospective clients. If you're replying to an email, answer all the questions that are being asked of you, and attempt to preempt questions as well, because that will reduce further return emails. Make use of the templates to make your life easier, but if you are using template style emails, just make sure you personalize them and you don't send a message to Bill Thornton and it says, "Hi, John." Use short paragraphs and blank lines to structure your email. It's much harder to read on screen than it is on paper. So just keep that in mind, and it's good to separate your introduction or your hello from the body of the message, and then you're closing off. So you have three main sections, and if the body is large, then keep the sentences short or use spaces in between the paragraphs as well. Again, never reply back and discuss a different subject without changing the subject line. If you're replying back about the particular subject, that's fine, but if not, then change it. Don't discuss confidential information by email. I think that one is sort of self-explanatory. It's because it's in the written form, and anything in the written form up in the cloud has the potential to go AWOL. Use the CC functionality to copy only. The CC functionality essentially means that the person that's getting the email, and if they're in the CC line, there's essentially no action required by them. There's no action needed to be taken. And they're just being shown the email for information purposes. There's often a lot of confusion about that as well. So again, if you're in the CC line, also to remember that it might be only appropriate to reply back to the sender and not to reply back to everybody involved. And just to watch out for that. And that brings me on to the BCC line. So use that BCC line if you're sending emails to multiple parties, and that will protect the individual addresses. And only use the CC when everybody needs to actually see that the message is meant for everybody, if that makes sense. Leave out read and delivery receipts. Delivery receipts, fair enough, because it's the system is sending you back the receipt, whether the message has safely gone out of your own email application. But asking for a read receipt, when I was doing some research on this, I realized that it's not really that appropriate to use it. So I don't actually know why the email accounts provide it or the email programs provide it. Personally, I think it portrays that you don't trust the person if you're demanding a read receipt. And ultimately, it's up to them. Ultimately, they can ignore it, and you're still unaware if you're unaware whether they've received it or not. So there's a nice long list of pointers in terms of email etiquette, and I hope that you've gotten some good ones out of that.
Actually, I did. I like listening to it. Some of them actually kind of cracked me up the way you delivered those. So thanks for injecting humor into something that could have been kind of boring. Can we get these in the show notes?
I sure can. I could put them into a PowerPoint or
just a little HTML or text file, and we'll add the list to the show notes. So if people want to refer back to them, they can just hit the web page and download them.
Absolutely, no problem.
or if you just have it on a blog post, one of your blogs, we'll put your URL in there as well.
Sure, that would be great, Keith.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the time. There's actually a couple in there that you'd covered were my pet peeves that I hope people will stop doing, and some other things I learned in there about using the CC. Sometimes I use the CC incorrectly. I just throw everybody in there. And you're right. Yeah. It's better if you use it appropriately. The person who should respond should be in the original slot.
That's right.
Another thing I've noticed on the subject line, one of the first ones you mentioned was I try to not put the subject line in until after I finish the email. And then it should be a recap of what's in the email rather than the other way around, because you might get off topic. So I found
that's
that as a little
That's a very good point
to come back. And if it doesn't have it and you click to send, it'll give you a warning. Are you sure you don't want it? And it's a reminder to put one in at that point. So,
unless you turn off that option.
Yeah, then you can get yourself stuck. So, with technology, it has great power, and with great power comes great responsibility.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time today, Elaine. And appreciate your sharing email etiquette with us, and hopefully we'll have you come back on another episode in the future.
Thank you very much, Keith. One thing I would add to the end of that is that every company, every organization should have an email policy, so that at least if an employee has questions or problems, that they can refer to this policy and it literally lays out the law for that particular company. I think that's a good idea. And certainly the larger organizations will have one anyway. But even for a small organization, I think it'd be a really good thing to have.
And even if you don't have an official policy, just having your list would be fantastic. That'd be a good place to start.
Okay, it's on its way.
All right. Thanks again, Elaine.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Another episode ends. Thanks to all of our contributors today, Ben Miller and Elaine Rogers and all those others who helped out with today's show. I'm Keith Parsons, signing off for Wireless LAN Weekly. We'll see you next week.
Wireless LAN Weekly, a podcast focused on the needs of wireless LAN professionals. We look forward to your feedback. Please leave your comments at the bottom of the show notes, or email feedback on the show can be sent to feedback@wirelesslanprofessionals.com. If you'd like to leave a voicemail feedback, just call 24/7 and leave a message at 1-801-481-9018. Until next time, this has been another production of wirelesslanprofessionals.com, a place to educate, inform, entertain, and inspire.